Have you ever stepped into a leadership role and suddenly felt like everything you knew wasn't enough? That moment of uncertainty is what our guest today, Peter Steinberg, calls leadership shock. Why does it happen? How do you get to navigate through it? This is what we're going to be talking about here today. Peter is an executive coach with over 2 decades of experience guiding leaders through significant transitions. He is the author of Leadership Shock, using authenticity to navigate the hidden dangers of career success. And he draws on his extensive background, including his tenure at the as head coach of the USA women's rugby team and leading them to 2 Rugby World Cups. And he's also coached at the Olympics in Rio. And he talks about this authentic leadership model, which we're going to talk about here. And it is a framework designed to help leaders examine their purpose, role expectations, vision, and approach so that they can reset their leadership style and thrive in new settings. And so I'm really excited to have him here. Peter, welcome to Leaders Transformation.
Nicole, very happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, and thank you for your patience. I know this has been a while coming for us to do this interview.
I think both of us were responsible for it being a while. So I think it's like calendars get a little crazy. That's part of leadership shock. So crazy calendars and managing those. So no problem.
Yes. Well, and it's funny, full disclosure. Okay. So for our listeners and viewers coming on, normally I'm on time. And I just think it's actually funny because as you were just saying that, I think it's funny because I was running behind, I was a little distracted and so forth. And here we are, we're going to be talking about leadership shock and how do we navigate through this and the overwhelm of sometimes like just so much going on. And so let's start off there. Let's talk about leadership shock. What is it? And then we can talk about some of the the common indicators, and then of course how do we deal with it?
Sure. So it's interesting, Nicole. Working as an executive coach, I was doing it. I've been doing it for about 10 years, and I started realizing that I was working with clients that all had the same challenge, and their challenge was that something had changed. In many cases, it was because they had taken a new role, but it could be that actually the organization around them had changed. And I was asked to come in because they were struggling with their performance. And these were often they were high performers. They were people that were seen, they were in succession plans, and all of a sudden they weren't performing. And so about 10 years in, and maybe a little bit later than I said, oh, there's a pattern here. Right. So let me investigate that a little bit. And I started really focusing on this idea of being intentional and intentional leadership. And it's this idea that every minute we have is valuable. And so every minute, how you spend it is valuable. And you really need to be explicit in developing both your priorities, but also how you want to lead. And so that's sort of the model, the authentic, that was the birth of the authentic leadership model. But now I think I've really been able to identify leadership shock. And in fact, since the book has come out, I've realized that there's probably degrees of shock. And so, leadership shock is my calendar's crazy. Like I'm double, triple booked and I don't know which meetings to take. My team is confused, right? So they're not exactly sure what I'm doing. At the end of the week, I feel like I haven't been able to make any progress. All I've done is been fighting fires and I'm exhausted. And I think those are the symptoms. And what I've realized since the book has come out is that people experience those in moments in their leadership. And those moments are really connected to transition. So something has changed, the market has changed, my boss has changed, something has changed, it's created a change in the dynamic. And so what happens is that for most leaders, because their leadership approach is so implicit, I just grew up, I just lead the way it naturally leads, it becomes really, really hard to actually change the way I lead when I get a different role. And so what we try to do with the authentic leadership model is help people make their leadership explicit. And we have a system for doing that. So it allows them, when the context changes around them, they can explicitly change the way that they lead. So I think the symptoms are this craziness and not being able to do stuff, but the cause is we actually don't think about the way we lead very much. And so we find ourselves often in these implicit places, not understanding why things don't work anymore, when it's because we need to change the way that we lead.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you say that because I can even relate as an entrepreneur, not, working for someone else, but owning my own company, that they and different seasons in my life where things have changed. And there's, like you said, markets change, circumstances change. You have a new launch, right? Like I'm in the process of launching a new venture. And it's like there's all these things. And I kind of liken it to like a video game, right? What got you to, success at level 1 or level 2 will get you killed at level 3, kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
no, it's exactly right. I love that. I love that
yeah.
analogy.
And
Yeah,
so,
I think,
yeah, talk
and
about
so,
that.
the interesting thing about the book is that the subtitle is Navigating the Hidden Dangers of Career Success. Because if you are successful, like at level 1 and level 2, what's your incentive? Like, this is what's got me here. When I'm in level 3, why should I change? And then you get killed. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I should have changed, right? So I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love your model there. Let's talk about the authentic leadership model and dive into that. And I love how your book, by the way, walks through. It's like a story. So we see the practical. You have the case studies in there, but there's this great story of this really really busy leader. And it's funny how you also tied in not just the interaction with them, but with him, but also the interaction with his team and how the effect is, so that they could, so
Yeah,
we can see as we read the book, we can see the holistic impact of when a leader is actually not operating by this model. So,
right.
I love that. So let's talk about what this model is, and even for our listeners and viewers, that we like, where do we start with this? So they can
Yeah.
they can have some takeaways.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just quickly, I wrote the book so I would finish it. So I don't finish business books. I get like a third of the way through and I've got it. And you have to
Yeah,
tell me all the case studies and all the examples. So I wrote it as a narrative.
yeah,
And so you have to
that's
read the
good.
end of the book because there's actually a twist. So if you don't read the end of the book, you won't know what the twist is. And so it was written particularly for the people that just want to read narratives, but there's also a guide for you to like build your own authentic leadership model. So let's just talk about this term of authentic, right? Because it
Yeah,
gets thrown around a lot. Everyone says, I want to be an authentic leader. In fact, I have worked with clients who said, well, I lead this way because it's authentic,
yeah.
right? Which is really
It's
a
like I'm
way
a
of saying,
jerk, but it's okay because I'm being
yeah, that's okay.
authentically a
Exactly.
jerk.
It's like, I'm a jerk, but I'm being authentic. I'm like, no, no, no. That's
Mm,
not what we mean about being authentic. Behavior isn't authentic. It's really grounded in the things that that are important to you. So in the model, there are things that are authentic to you, and then there are things that are contextual. So the authentic pieces are your purpose. So that's the thing that really gets you up in the morning, right? What fills your emotional tank? When you have those weeks and you work 60 hours, but it feels great at the end. Like whatever you're doing there is fulfilling your purpose. It's doing the things that you're supposed to do. And my experience is that most leaders have never really thought about that. Like their purpose, when I first ask leaders what their purpose is, they're like, I'm going to grow the business by 5%. I'm like, no, 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 that's not your purpose, right? That's your vision for what you want. Your purpose is like, what's important to you? What's the impact you want to have in your life? And the reason why that's important is if I'm going to really, especially as a senior executive, if I'm going to really be successful and sustainable over the long term, the things that I do have to give me energy. And if I can explicitly connect the things that I do with the things that are fundamentally important to me, my purpose, like the impact I want to make, then it's energy giving, right?
yeah,
If I don't do that, sometimes then it's energy draining and it's hard for me to. So part of the authentic piece is this purpose. And that's sort of like the foundation of the model. And then there's two other authentic pieces that I would consider authentic, right? So one is, what are the strengths that you bring to this role? So I call that, what's the value that you provide
right.
in this role? Now that's
Yeah.
different than what are your strengths,
Hmm.
right? And in fact, the strengths that you had, it's a little bit like the things that got me through level 2 get me killed in level 3, right? That's the
Yeah.
same thing here. Like if I'm the director of finance and my strength is being in the details, and I become the VP of finance, all of a sudden my strength becomes a weakness. So being really intentional about what your strengths are you bring to the role, and then truly understanding what your leadership beliefs are. Right? What is it that you think great leaders do? That's another way, and again, people haven't really thought about this. Like, there is no one leadership model. Every authentic leadership model is different. Your beliefs about Nicole are different than my beliefs. They're not right and wrong. They're the things that we believe. There are things from our experience, what we've read, like the leaders that we've had, both that we liked and we didn't like. And so understanding truly what your leadership beliefs are, those things are really, really authentic, right? Those are the things that are important to you. And I work with colleagues who do this work, and that's what they do. They say, hey, look, it's really about getting people to understand themselves. But the authentic leadership model isn't just sort of like this purpose piece, it's contextual, right? So it's like, in this moment, something has changed. So it can't just be the authentic piece of you. And the two contextual pieces are vision. What do you want to accomplish in the role that you have? And role expectation. What is it that the organization expects of you? So if you can take your purpose and your vision and your role expectation, then you can actually, and the value that you provide, you can say, well, what are my priorities? What are the 2 or 3 things that I should be doing, really focused on? And then if you take your purpose and you take your priorities and your leadership beliefs, then you can say, I understand I need to spend my time on these 3 or 4 things. How should I spend my time? What kind of leader should I be? And so when you have your priorities and your leadership approach or leadership principles, then that allows you to intentionally lead in this role that you have. And I think that's what gets people out of leadership shock. And I would just say that it's a living document. It's not like I'm done. It is going to get chiseled in stone and put up on the wall. In fact, Nicole Massey, who's a vice president at Smuckers, she's in the book. It's one of the case studies in the book. And when I was talking to her about the case study, she said, "Oh, Pete, hey, when I was promoted to my new role, I pulled up my authentic leadership model and I worked my way through it." Unfortunately, Nicole, I'm an entrepreneur too. As a coach, I have a terrible business model because my goal is to make their authentic leadership model self-sustainable, so they don't need me anymore.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, work with me for 4 months and you don't need me again. But that's really the power of it. The power of it is it gives you a way to intentionally think about your leadership like forever, right? It gives you a system to think about it. So that's really what the authentic leadership model is.
Well, so I want to just touch on something here, which I found really interesting in the book. And you just mentioned, like, people work with me for 4 months. A lot of times leaders don't want to spend the time here because, and you alluded to in the story with Michael, he's like, I don't have time for this because I got things to do. They don't want to work on this, or if they do, it's okay, I'll give you 4 weeks. I'll give you 4 sessions or whatever, 6 sessions. And I'm going to work on 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're just going to knock these out, because that's how they're used to operating when it comes to getting the goal is to get it done. And I realized that for myself, I had fallen into that even with this launch recently. Is like, I'm trying to get things done. I got to do some recordings and so forth. And I'm like, why do I hate them so much? Like, they just, I'm looking at them and I'm going, what is wrong with them? All the content's good. And I realized, I'm like, put my coaching hat on and I'm looking at it and the trainer hat on. And I'm like, it's because you're checking a box. You're just trying to get it done. And so the life, the passion isn't in it. And so it's more mechanical. And so when you're talking about purpose and vision and values, this takes time to unpack. How do you get a leader's attention enough? Because you can talk about the how, but I can just hear even executive coaches, or aspiring executive coaches saying, like, how do you get them to actually stop and take the time? Or a leader listening to this saying, but I don't have time for that. I need I need an answer now. Cause I need solutions yesterday.
So, a little bit of how the sausage is made. So generally when I work with clients and I come in, they're in a moment of transition, right? Or transformation. And in my coaching work, what I do is I spend 30 minutes talking about issues that they're facing right now. and 30 minutes talking about the authentic leadership model, because I want to give them real value. I want them to have that next call. And so if I came in, I just said, hey, we're going to talk about purpose and vision. At the end of it, they're going to say, they're going to be like, well, that wasn't useful. So what I do, and also like, it's like one of those things I learned as a rugby coach, you have to coach to the needs of the client, not to your needs. Right. So the needs of the client is they've got issues that they're going to deal with now. Right. That's important to them. And so making sure that you have that relationship with them that you can build over time. So 30 minutes on what are you facing right now? What are the issues that you're facing with? Like, let's problem solve those together. And then 30 minutes on the authentic leadership model. But I've done some things like I had a senior vice president of like very large, Fortune 200 company. We had our first call in August, and then next call was canceled. Next call was canceled. Next call was canceled. Like our next call was in December, and I said, "Look, I haven't invoiced anything because I'm not going to invoice it if you don't want to do the work." And that's and by the way, no judgment here. I understand. And he goes, "No, I want to do the work." And I said, "All right, then here's what I need you to do, right? And you need to talk to your EA, and you need to talk to your boss who is supporting you on this." And be like, the time that I have with Pete will always be a priority. And we've had 2 calls so far this year, and they've sat there and they haven't moved. I'm like, that's what but I'm fine. I would much rather walk away from a client that isn't going to do the work. Than try and get it done. I mean, there's really 3 kinds of clients that I end up working with. There is the client that does the work, and I go through the full process with them. And those people I normally end up continue to work with over like multiple years. There's the other client who actually, and this is great, gets it halfway through. They're like, I did my model. You're like, did you? And you start questioning, like, well, no, you got it. You don't need me anymore. Like halfway through the course, I'm like, you don't need me anymore. You got it. I'm here if you need help. But like for them, the system just worked and it clicked. And then I have the clients that check the box. We did our 6 calls. We did our 8 calls. And we checked the box. But, I mean, you know what it's like, Nicole. That doesn't fill my emotional tank.
No,
right.
It's not why we do it.
It isn't why we do it. And I take that personally. I feel like I reflect on those clients quite a lot and say, what could I have done differently as a coach? Which could have been, by the way, saying no. Right, not doing the work.
Say,
like,
maybe
what was
they're
the
just not
sign
ready.
up front? Not doing the work. No, it was so it is. It's hard, and just like it is, like the what I talk about doing with Michael is what I end up doing with most of my clients. In fact, I had a recent 2 years ago, a client, C-suite executive, huge company, president of a very like a $5 billion business, like so big deal. And couldn't find time to meet with me. Like calendar was out of place. And so exactly what I did with Michael, you just got to find some time. But I remember calling up Jeff Tanner, who's in the book, and Jeff was the chief commercial officer at Smucker. He's now the CEO of Simply Good Foods. And I said, Jeff, how do you manage your time? How do you decide if you're going to be in a meeting or not? And he said, if the meeting isn't going to move the stock price, I'm not in the room. I was like, huh. He said, it's not worth my time to be in the room and make an idea 1% better. And I that was like, and I've used that phrase with and it's really hit clients. And I use it in workshops. I do sort of maximizing your impact workshop. I mean, I'm a huge believer from coaching. When you coach and you're going to the Olympics or you're going to the World Cup, you have a limited amount of time with your athletes. 10 minutes wasted, you can't get back. It's a non-renewable resource. Leaders don't think like that about their time. They use their time all over the place. And so getting the leaders that I work with to understand, look at your, like often I'll be like, show me your calendar, or their chief of staff. I'll go through that calendar. I'll be like, what's that? I'm like, all right, I want you to ask them if that's a good return on their investment. Is that worth an hour of their time? Right. I just want you to ask, okay, ask them, is that worth? So I get the chief of staff or EA often to go through and be like, hey, we've highlighted these in red, these 6 meetings these weeks. And it's not like, I don't know if it's worth their time or not. But just often when you stop and you say, is that worth your investment? They'll be like, oh, no, that's not. So,
well, it's interesting too, is that, and this may be a bad example, but sometimes, so I've had stuff happen, like personal stuff, like, deaths in the family and different things.
Right.
And it's interesting what you're willing to cancel then when something happens. Like somebody gets sick. right? And they're like, I can't, I got to be in all these meetings. But then all of a sudden they get the flu and they can't be in those meetings. And you know what? Life goes on, right? Like somebody else stepped in, somebody else did it. And it's like, not that you want to, avoid the things but
Yeah.
it's like, if you have that perspective
Our
of going
time
like,
is way more fungible than we
yeah,
think. Way
then we
more
think,
fungible than we
yeah,
think. Yeah.
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 I,
So that's one of the things I do with my clients. So I do a lot of work in professional services. So a lot of work with Big Four and large consulting firms. And Scott McDonald, who was the CEO of Oliver Wyman, is one of the endorsers of the book. And I would say to Scott, if on Friday a client said, "Hey, I need you to come and pitch a multi-million-dollar business," like how would your week look? Well, I'll cancel this, and this. I'm like, okay, so why don't you cancel that? Like, if it's not that important, why is it on your calendar?
yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
so I think time and the way we think about time, I think is so important. And I think if I can help my client think about time differently as a non-renewable resource is really valuable. The other thing we do, Nicole, is we discount time. So, I'll call a client, I'll be like, "Hey, I want to sell you something. Can you meet next week?" They're like, "My calendar's crazy." And then I'll be like, "Oh, can you meet in May?" And they're like, "Sure, wide open." I'm like, "Hold on. A week before that time in May, is your calendar going to be crazy or not? Like, why is that hour in May different than the hour now?"
yeah.
And it
That
should
was
be valued the same.
That was great. You pointed that out in the book, and I think that's a great point because a lot of times we look at it. Yeah, so when the time comes, that's why we end up with all this busyness in our calendar because we booked it when
Right.
when our calendar wasn't too busy.
Right.
Like thinking that somehow delusionally thinking that it was not going to be busy by the time we got
Right.
there. So yeah,
Right.
it's really being diligent with, is this important? How does this apply? Like coming back to knowing your purpose, knowing your vision, knowing the value that you bring, the expectations, all of this is
Right.
critical to being able to know what are your priorities, what to say yes to and what to say no to. There's a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this, and I think about like it's not hard to say no to bad opportunities, really, because they kind of stand
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
What's hard is to say no to good opportunities that just aren't the right opportunity for you,
Or
or the right
mediocre
or
opportunities.
mediocre. It's kind of like
Right.
me, So yeah, super
I,
super
I,
important.
one of the really interesting things that I think that we haven't quite addressed, and I know is like the post-COVID work from home issue. And that issue is we all started work when our commute started. So if
Right.
I was going to, my commute started at 7:30, I actually opened my laptop at 7:30. And then if my commute got me home at 6, I closed my laptop at 6. So two things happened. One is we added like, for many people, maybe 2 hours to their workday. And we lost the thinking time,
Yeah.
which we had on our commute, which it
Yeah.
turns out was pretty valuable. Right. And so I often have to work with clients on a virtual commute. Like, if you're working for a big corporation, the easiest virtual commute is to shut your computer down. Because actually shutting it down, that's like starting it up again, it's going to take 15 minutes and that's your commute, right? Because it's going to
Yeah.
update things and it's going to do all
True.
these things. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that can be your commute. It's also a barrier to going back to work. Like if I
Mm-hmm.
can just lift my computer up and jump on, I'll go check emails. But if I
Yeah.
have to lift it up and turn it on, I don't.
That's a good one.
Now I'm
Yeah.
I'm on a Mac, so it's a little bit easier on the Mac. But these are like the PCs for large corporations. Um, so 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 what I try to do is be like, don't fill your calendar. Like it doesn't matter that you don't have anything else. If something, and I love your context, is if it's a mediocre or poor opportunity, even if you have time, cancel it. You can use time. That
Yeah.
like, and that's actually the calculation that leaders do make when they're forced to, which is it more important for me to get this work done that I have to get done, or is it more important for me to be on the call?
Yeah.
If I don't have deadlines for the work, I'm going to be on the call. And
Yeah.
that, like, you should just choose whether you should be on the call or not.
Yeah.
Regardless, if I don't have to be on the call, I shouldn't be on the call.
Yeah. That's so
And I
good.
think, yeah, I think there's a real, and again, I think the work from home piece, everything, and now everyone's online. I think it's really impacting the team dynamics that we have, because it used to be that we'd meet in our team room and we would chat for like 10 minutes before we do the agenda. And now we get on our Teams calls or our Zoom calls and, okay, item one, We've lost all of that team connection that happens. Like my team, we have about 6 or 7 subcontractors that work with us. And so every week we have a team call. It's 30 minutes, and 20 minutes is us answering some crazy question that my chief of staff comes up with. And then the
Yeah.
last 10 minutes, we're like client needs, business development, and administration.
Yeah.
But the purpose
But
of
you
the
need
meeting
that
is the
time.
first 20.
Yeah.
It's the first 20.
Yeah.
That's the purpose. But this actually comes back to the authentic leadership model, because I'm actually here with a client right now, and I was working through a team, and they were working through their authentic leadership model. And one of the team members came up with like, hey, what I really want to do is I want to support the careers of my team. I'm like, great.
Okay.
When does that come up in your team meetings?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't. But if that's a priority for you, shouldn't it be in your team meetings? Shouldn't people be like, it was just the intentionality of taking something that's implicit, which is like, I always thought I needed to do this, and make it explicit, which means how do I lead my team, is I think really powerful. And so, thinking really intentionally about your meetings as a leader, I think are really, really critical.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think, Nicole, you asked me a question and then I talked for like 10 minutes. So I'll try not to do that anymore.
This is great. There's so much that we could talk about. This is great. And this is really gets to the issue of prioritizing your time based on, again, coming back to that purpose and vision and what your value, because we can get so busy. I think one of the problems also is that we get so busy with things because it makes us feel significant, right? Like I've got to be at that meeting. I've got to be at that meeting. I've got to do that thing, because if I don't do it, it's not going to get done well.
Yeah.
But coming back to that earlier, where we started talking about leadership styles, is recognizing that what led to your success at this point isn't what's going to lead to your success in the next one, and knowing what are the needs of the role. I think that's really important. I think we can all learn from that, and it's a good refresher, good reminder to continually go back and revisit. Like I've done that for myself. It's like I challenge myself when I look at my schedule on a regular basis and go, okay, so is any of this filler? Like, do I need to have these meetings? Like what happens? I mean, full disclosure, I did that even like last week, looking at this week, and looked at our meeting and was like, okay, is that something that's necessary? Like, and it's
I did the same thing. I'm like, I'm at a client site. I know this is going to be squeezed, but I know we've been pushed off. And I'm like, no, this is the conversation I want to have. Right?
Yes,
intentionally.
Yes. And then that's where yes, exactly. That's where we are intentional about it. And speaking of which, I know that you've got a meeting starting in a few minutes as well. So we do want to wrap it up. There's so much that we could talk about here. When you talk about
we should start scheduling now for 2026, the way our schedules go. But before we wrap up, Nicole, I did want to just reflect on your journey, because this is 10 years of podcasts for you.
Yeah.
2025, right?
Yes, it is.
So like when, more than 500 podcasts, I mean, the conversations that you have had have been really remarkable, and the sustained excellence that you've had for 10 years. I mean, you were podcasting probably when people didn't even know what podcasting was, or most people. It wasn't as crowded a market as it is now, but that's a pretty impressive record. To be going 10 years and having the audience that you have. And I'm sure it came with a lot of learning. So because this is sort of like, I know you want to wrap and I need to wrap.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
But it goes back to something that you said. I was interviewed for a podcast last year, and it was a sports podcast because of my coaching background. And they said, what made you a good coach? I've been retired for a couple of years. And I'm like, oh, I wasn't a good coach. But like, what do you mean? I said, I look back now, and I look back at like, I could have been such a better coach. If I coached tomorrow, I'd be a better coach than I was then. And I think that's really what great leadership is. Great leadership is a desire to be better tomorrow than you are today. And to do that, you need to find a way to continually get feedback. So when I look at you and I see 10 years of excellence, like, it would be interesting to get the story from you about what you were like 10 years ago and what you are today and the growth you have been through?
Well,
Probably not for this podcast, but that would be an interesting podcast. You should bring on your favorite guest to interview you about the 10 years.
Well, actually, it's funny because I had a guest who interviewed me in episode, I think it was 107, a friend of mine, Evan Money, because he's like, Nicole, he's such a funny guy. He's like, Nicole, the best podcast hasn't been recorded yet. And I said, oh, what's that? And he goes, you recorded, interview you. So he actually did interview me, which was fun, but it's been a long time. So yeah, maybe I'll do that. But it's interesting because you said like, people didn't know what podcasting was back then. I didn't know what podcasting was back then when I first had this inspired thought. And so it has been a journey, and it has been such a pleasure. And I was kind of chuckling because you're like, wow, 500 episodes and so forth. And then when did we start off today with the podcast? Like I'm juggling in like one moment, disorganized and so forth. And that's not usually the way it goes, but you can't do 500 plus episodes like that. Can't sustain that. But I just thought that was funny because I'm like, and you got to see the background of how we get to this point. But Peter, thank you so much. There's so much more that we could talk about here. Innovation is something that you talk a lot about. And so I'm just going to actually encourage our listeners and our viewers to go and, number one, get a copy of your book, Leadership Shock, and it's everywhere, that books are available. Also, your website, petesteinberg.com and innovative-thought.com to learn more. And I know you've got lots of resources on there where they can learn about how you work with clients to help them to develop solutions to complex problems and all of that. And so I just encourage them to go and and learn more about that there, if that is something that, if you've got a complex issue, whether it be from a leadership standpoint or even business standpoint, I would encourage you to go and check out what Peter has available. And then Peter, we're going to have you back on to continue this conversation at a later date next year, hopefully in the next decade. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate it. And any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, just really appreciate the conversation. Love having conversations about leadership, and appreciate the support for the book. Look forward to the next one, Nicole.
Likewise. And I'll just finish off with our audience here. I'm just going to say this: leaders of transformation, take action. So take action on something you learned today. I encourage you that if you do not know what your purpose, your vision, your priorities, your value is, go figure it out. It's going to make a difference. It's going to make a huge difference for your life. Peter can help you. His team can help you with that. There's resources, as I said, through the book, but go and do that because it's going to make a huge difference for you this year and for years to come. You've got to get that sorted out if you haven't already. And if you think you have it sorted out, maybe it's time to revisit that. So I encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear from you how you do, how this has impacted you, how we can support you in that, any insights. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com and find us there. And thanks for being here today. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders of Transformation.